Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 790. Today we're going to talk about Talisman 5th Edition. Now the full name is Talisman, the Magical Quest Game 5th Edition. So this is a new edition, and I didn't realize how long it's been since the last edition, because I was telling my friends the other day, the last time I played Talisman it was 3rd edition. Then I went and looked and I was like, no, it was 4th. But it was like almost 20 years ago, 15 years ago, let's say. And yeah, so it's been a while since we've had a new edition of this. And so it's kind of like a reset, reboot. There'll be more expansions and stuff coming, which I'll kind of talk about at the end in the review. There are some relatively significant changes between this edition and in 4th edition, and in terms of the rules and also in terms of some of the components a little bit. So let's jump down to the table. If you've not played Talisman before, I'll give you kind of a brief overview of how it generally works, and then I'll talk more specifically about some of the changes. Okay, so you can see I've got the board set up here. It's very much like previous editions. I will say I kind of like the graphic design of the board and the kind of the layout of where the text is at and the font and all that kind of stuff. To me, it's a little bit clearer, although it's still kind of hard to read, you know, the text on the other side of the board and that kind of stuff. But once you get used to the board, it's not too bad. Generally, I like the art part of the design in 4th edition a little bit more than this. So it's kind of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing with the general kind of layout and stuff. Some of the spaces are a little bit different, but generally the spaces are all pretty much the same. And if you've not played the game, you can see, well, let's just go down here. Here we have the prophetess character, and this is her starting zone here, the chapel. And on your turn, what you're going to do is you're going to roll a die. Let's say I rolled 5, and then basically you can move 5 spaces that way or 5 spaces that way, left or right. You choose, you see where you might land and end up. And so in this case, let's just say we're going to move here. So we'd move to the fields. And a lot of the spaces have this little card draw icon. And what that means is you're going to draw a card off the top of your adventure deck there, which is a large deck of cards. And then you're basically going to have an encounter or find an item or something like that. So in this place, we would place this card here, and this would be a magical stream. You put some tokens on it. And from here, you can gain strength. And I'll explain what that is in a minute. So basically, this card will now sit there until, in this case, the counters are used up, and then this card will move away. So the next time that players move to a space, or this space, they won't need to draw a card. So basically, you always draw a card up to the limit. In this case, it's just 1 card. There'll be other spaces like this one here in the middle, which is +3. So if you encounter this space here and it's empty, you'll draw 3 cards. If there were 2 cards already there when you got there, you would just draw 1 up to 3 there. And then once we go here, if this gets cleared, somebody else comes here, then you might draw an ogre card. In that case, you'll have an encounter, basically a fight with the ogre. If we zoom in a little bit here, you can see it has a strength 5. Sometimes there's some other special abilities and stuff with the monster that you might be fighting. Usually you're going to fight them in strength or craft. So strength is sort of physical combat, craft is magic or sort of, you know, intellectual types of encounters. And so you're going to be bouncing around the board every turn, rolling a die, moving that number of spaces until you kind of level yourself up enough that you start to stop moving around the outermost region here. And then there's a couple of places here is the Sentinel, for example, that you can challenge them to get access to the center ring. And there's some other things like you can build a raft, because you can notice here, you can kind of see there's a river going around there to go across. There is some actions you can do on the tavern space, that kind of thing. So once you get in here, these areas are a little bit harder. And then there is over here the Portal of Power, which is one of the ways that you can get into the final ring. Now, once you're in that final ring, you will no longer be rolling a die. You will be moving 1 space at a time until you get to the very, very center. Now, you can't get very far in that center ring until you have obtained a talisman. So there's a few ways to do it that you can get a talisman. One of the ways is you can find it in your adventure deck. The other way is you can do a quest. There's a Warlock's Cave, which is over here, which will give you a quest you can roll up on. And there's some other different ways that you can get a talisman. So once you have your talisman, you'll be able to get past a certain space here, and then you can get to the center space, and you basically fight the dragon, which is a strength 10, craft 10 encounter. So you pick one and then fight them, and then whoever does that first will win the game. So it's definitely a race around the board until you level up enough till you get in there and you found a talisman at some point. to then be in the center there and then have combat. So let's take a look at a character sheet. So if we take here's the prophetess here. And so it gives you some starting items. So you've got strength 2, craft 4, some starting special abilities and stuff. The starting space, you can see, remember we had her at the chapel. Here's your life points, and you can see there's these little cones. There are also the nice tray here you can just pull out of the box. There are larger cones. These count as 5 of a particular thing. And you have coins and such over there, but that's easy to set off to the side there. And so you start with 1 gold. You start with 2 fate, which I'll explain, and then you get your life. You can have 4 objects, and you put these down here. Now, Talisman does not count as one of your objects, which I think is a change from 4th edition. And you can have as many followers as you like. Now, the prophetess here, since it says on her card, she starts with a random spell off of the spell deck. So there's a bunch of spells in there. And you can acquire spells. Anybody can acquire spells if they have enough craft. There's a table in the rulebook here which shows if you have, let's say in her case, she has 4 craft. She starts with 1 spell, so she could acquire another spell all the way up to 6 or more. You can have up to 3 spells. And that spells are something that you can do basically at any time on your turn. You can also cast them on somebody else's turn, but you can only do 1 spell because you kind of could negatively affect another player. And you can fight other players, which we'll talk about. But you don't just get spells, you've got to do an action on the board or encounter some kind of creature or something that will grant you a spell. And so what you want to do in the game is level up your strength and your craft so you can fight ever increasing, more difficult encounters. And the one way that you can do that, so let's say we had defeated this ogre in this case. So at any point on your turn, you can discard creatures equal to or more than your current strength or your craft. So in this case, we have an ogre of 5 strength that we magically beat with our 2 strength. But maybe we had a sword or something that gave us extra strength, that kind of thing. So if you discard creatures equal to or more than that, you can discard them, and then you can add another strength to your pool there. And so you can keep doing that until you build up a massive amount. You can also get more life. When the game tells you to heal life, it'll heal up to your starting value, but if you quote unquote gain life, you can actually go above your starting value. Just while we're on the board here, you can see you've got coins. There are different little merchant spots on the board, or new ones may come out of the adventure deck where you can buy items. There is kind of a merchant deck here, so you can just go through these. You don't have to shuffle them. You can buy copies of armor and weapons and mules and things like that will actually give you extra spaces for more objects. You can get like water, so you can live in the desert a little bit longer. Otherwise, you're going to have to lose health. So there's a lot of good stuff to purchase in the game. Also, you have fate. Now, fate you can spend any time to reroll one of your dice. So if you're combating a monster here, and let's say they rolled a 6 and you rolled a 2, you can use that fate to reroll your die, or when you're rolling to maybe do one of the actions on the board, you can reroll one of your dice. But you can't spend a fate to reroll somebody else's die or kind of like the NPC's die. So that's the main way to use fate. And new in 5th edition is after you roll to move, if you don't get the roll that you quite want, which can be a frustration in the game, you can actually just discard a fate and move anywhere you want, left or right, within 6 spaces. So if you're right next to a space you want to go to, you can only get there by rolling a 1 on this turn. But if you really want to get there, you feel like the race is in question, then you can just spend one of these and just move right there. And the other thing to notice here is we can see the alignment. Now you see I have an evil alignment on the prophetess. Now by default she starts as good, and in the course of the game you can have encounters that change your alignment, but one of the changes with 5th edition is you can just go ahead and pick an alignment at the start of the game, which is fun because you could do an evil prophetess, or in this case I have over here a good thief who normally starts off as neutral. So you can have a little bit of fun with that as well. And there'll be different spaces on the board that will benefit you if you're evil, or be of a non-benefit to you if you're evil, and vice versa with good as well. There'll be good spaces that are good for good and spaces that will be bad for good. And I should say there is 12 different characters to come in this starting box here, so that's good. It gives you a lot of variety. I don't think the gold, I don't remember it being plastic in the last edition, so that's kind of an upgrade there. Generally, the components are really good. Like I said, the board, I'm sort of like, I like really some parts of it, and other parts, you know, I don't know. I kind of miss sort of the general art of the board, but the graphic design and clarity, I think, is a little bit better here. I do think the art and everything on all the cards and the components and everything is much, much better. I just like how these are laid out a little bit more. I mean, I'm kind of quibbling there. The only other sort of component complaint is they still have these cones, and sometimes telling the difference between a 5 and a 1 can be not as clear. I mean, and that's really a super nitpick. That's not that big of a deal. The one thing I do really like with this is I think the miniatures are actually very, very, very good, especially for kind of a big box, big box store, Target, Walmart type of game that you could see in a lot of places. These are some very nice miniatures here, and I've actually seen some people that I know that play Hero Quest that are going to make use of these in there. So these are pretty good quality here for the kind of the price point of this game and everything. So I think that's also very, very good quality there. And I will say, if you do get stuck, if you've played this before, you can go here. There's a nice page here where been here before. It's got all the updates, and then there's a couple of them that aren't actually mentioned there. Like I talked about leveling up the creatures and so on, like that's in here. But anything that you see that's marked with this, and it's marked very clearly in the rule book with that symbol, that's a change, and it's very easy to find in the rule book in here to go through there like that. Oh, and I should say, let's just go back down here. The other really big change before I forget is when you die in this game, or you get turned into a toad, which I'll just leave you to find out if you've never done that before. It is not the end of the world. You basically just go back to the village over here. You reset to 1 hit point, but you keep all your stuff. So you don't have to discard your character, although that is in there as an optional rule if you still want to play that way. It gives you the steps to do that. But you don't have to start completely over, which is a huge change, based on, that was probably my only gripe with the game, which I'll talk more about in the review from previous editions, and even Relic, which I'll talk about. But yeah, so that it's not as harsh as it could be, and but if you still want to play that way, the rules are still in there for that. Okay, so that is Talisman 5th edition. Let's go into my 3 pillars of review, and first I'll jump into playtime, because the box doesn't actually mention it, and I'm not going to look on Board Game Geek to see what it says. I will say the earlier editions could go longer because of 2 reasons. One, when you die, you start over completely, which is no longer the case in this edition. At least with the default rules, you can still play the optional rule. And the other thing is the leveling up in the early game is a little bit quicker, because instead of having to spend 7 strength or craft, you can just spend equal to or higher than your current. So you start to level up much, much quicker, like in the first couple of turns, which is nice, because it just gets you going, and then it's a nice way of kind of putting pressure on everybody to get things moving there. So my experience with this has been about 2 hours to play the game. Now, I've not played this edition with more than 2 players. I have played the other edition with 3 and 4 players, and this goes up to 6, and so that kind of bleeds me into the player count. And I would say 4 is probably a sweet spot there. It's kind of nice to have other players there, because I didn't mention this in the rules overview, but you can attack players. Mostly it's a strength combat, and when you do that, then you can either knock them down a life or steal one of their items and that kind of thing. So having more players on the board makes that a little bit more opportune, and it's a little more fun, because that's kind of more what the game's about. It's I'll talk about this more in the review part, but it's a little bit more traditional Ameritrash type of thing, where you're kind of just more having fun than being super strategic. Not that there's no strategy or no choice, basically, but there's a little bit there. But it's nice to have the other players. When you just have 2, you kind of you don't really get in each other's way, which can be nice too if you want to have more of a casual game. And I played it where we played it where not this particular edition, but in the past where there's no attacking each other, and that's actually fun too. You just kind of play it that. Like I've got no problem playing that way. And then it's just a pure race game, which can be very fun. But I think I don't have a desire to play with 5 or 6 because I think then the play time, even with the new edition with the changes, is still going to take a long time. And not that the whole game is going to take a long time, but there's going to be a lot of time between your turn. And sometimes your turns are really quick. It's like move here, grab a token or something, and then that's it. Your turn takes like 5 seconds. And then other people might have a little bit more involved turns. So if it's going around the table like that, that's just too long to wait. So 4 would be the absolute max. 3 and 4 should be fine. But as people have played the game, they won't have to be like reading all the spaces and all the cards. Then you will get kind of the gist of it. So in your first games of this, they could take some time to kind of understand the spaces, and I would say it's good because my recent experience of this has elucidated this even clearer for me. It's good to have somebody at the table that kind of knows everything on the board pretty much, and kind of knows how things can kind of pace itself out with the decks of cards and things, because you can act as a facilitator, and I think that's very important for a first play with this, because it can be kind of a lot going on, not in terms of like the strategic overload, but just the amount of stuff that can get on the board with all the different cards and stuff like that. So it's good to have a facilitator kind of help things along, almost acting as a GM, but still playing the game. So what is this game like? Well, obviously I'm going to compare it to the earlier editions of Talisman, and then also another game called Relic, which is basically Talisman engine, but in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, which is currently published by WizKids. It used to be published by Fantasy Flight, but I think you can still pick that up. So the things that I like that it does, I already mentioned the leveling up quicker. That's great. The kind of softer dying, I think that's really good. The one thing that I was actually thinking I would miss from Relic that is not in any edition of Talisman that I've played is in Relic, you have kind of color-coded decks. So there's I believe three different colors of adventure cards, and they'll go to certain areas. So it kind of scales things up a little bit more gradually in terms of the types of encounters you have, versus this, which is like you can grab anything out of that adventure deck. So you can, like on your first turn, you can go fight a strength 7 dragon, and you're going to lose, and that's going to be there for a while until somebody else can come along, and then get after it. Or you can run into something very easy, or a couple of easy things, kind of towards the middle end of the game in some of those center spaces. But I kind of like this better, I think. I don't know, it's probably like seasoned to taste kind of thing, because even if you draw a dragon, let's say on your first turn you move to the hills, you draw a dragon, you lose a life point. Okay, no big deal. Then you keep playing, and everybody's avoiding that space for a while, not for the rest of the game, but for a while. And it kind of takes on like a character of its own. And as you play through the game, you get kind of the mid to late game. The board, every time you play, is going to kind of shape itself out. So you're going to have these different locations. Oh, that's the little healing cave, or that's the place with the hermit that gives you the spells, and that kind of stuff. And some of the cards are just going to stay there. Once they're out, they're out. There's no really removing some of the cards. And so each game's going to kind of like organically create like a little kingdom or whatever that's going to be different than the last time you played. And so because of that, I'm kind of leaning towards, I do kind of like this. Because in Relic, it can get kind of samey, because they had like red, yellow, orange, and blue cards, if I remember right, on the adventure cards. So you kind of know what you're going to deal with. So it's a little bit more, it's more balanced, I guess, but it's also a little bit more obvious and predictable. Whereas this is, I wouldn't say it would be unbalanced. It's just a little bit more unpredictable. And you might have a turn that's a little bit wasted because you're going to encounter something that is too easy, so you just get it and you're like, whatever, I don't really need this, or it's too hard and you don't get anything. But then it's just okay, no big deal, because that'll happen in this game anyway. And then you can kind of like work towards it. It gives you a goal to work towards to try to beat that dragon. So anyway, I like that part of it. The other thing that I think I really like here is that the fate movement thing, because that that plus the dying rule would be kind of like a deal breaker for me in the other editions. And I don't think Relic had that either. So I think this is brand new to any of these sort of Talisman engine games where you can just spend a fate token and move anywhere you want within 1 to 6 spaces. Now, I've not played any of the expansions and stuff for the older editions, so maybe these were stuff that they added later, but that's really cool because you're just like, I'm good, I'm ready, now I know exactly what I need to do, I know exactly where I need to go, and I just want to go there. I don't want to wander anymore and collect items and level up. I have a very specific thing in mind, and it's kind of a big choice to spend that fate for the movement, because there are going to be times when you're going to need that fate to, like, you know, beat a very critical encounter, or even like in the last encounter of the game, it's good to have some fate stocked up for some of that stuff. But it's a really cool rule because it's nice. It makes it a good decision there. Yeah, so the other part I would mention is I just wanted to wrap back up to the thought of the facilitator, because it's been a while since I played Talisman. I played Relic much more recently, but the center space, that's a good teaching. If you can kind of teach from that space out, because there are certain things like you're going to need a certain amount of strength, a certain set of items, and then you know, some different things like that. And so if you can teach people, like, okay, you want to start going to the center about, you know, here when you have, like, let's say 10 strength probably, and I don't know, however much, 6, 7 craft, so you can have some spells and that kind of thing. So you can kind of show people like what you're going to encounter when you get there. So that gives people some guidance and stuff. And I found that was pretty helpful with the teach of the game. But yeah, so the other thing I wanted to mention, which I said I would mention earlier in the review, is they've already got 1 expansion, and they're going to probably have a bunch more, which has me excited, which is it's going to be like a co-op sort of campaign. And I think you're going to play through like 4 or 5 different sort of, I can't remember what they're called, but they're like going to change the end game, I think. They've released a little blurb about it and some pictures, but it gives you like 4 or 5 little quests, and it's co-op. And it's going to be campaign. So I think some stuff is going to carry over from game to game, and you're going to have different sort of adventures that you're going to take place, you know, in that center crown of command, you know, Talisman space, right? And that's really cool because that's some of the stuff that I really like in Relic that I'm glad that they're bringing here, is some different sort of end game type conditions and also co-op. The base Relic game had that. I think it had 3 or 4 or 5 different end games, where the basic one was just like basically the same as Talisman, and then you had some different conditions which made it interesting. So having that variability in end game is going to be really cool, and plus playing it co-op, which allowed me to actually play it solo, because that was one of the funnest ways I like to play Relic, is when it got, I think it was the 2nd expansion, you could actually do co-op. So it was cool. So it's like a little adventure game, and you know, you can see from the rules and everything, it's a very simple game, and some of those simple types of adventure games are really a fun way to pass the time. So I'm really excited for that. I don't remember the name of the expansion, but it is on Board Game Geek. So if you go to the page for Talisman 5th edition and expansion tab, you can get a link to that. And I think that's coming out in the fall. So I'm definitely going to be hanging on to this and taking a look at that expansion, which frankly is the thing that has me most excited about this new edition. I didn't really know what the changes were in the rules, but these changes I think I'm pretty excited about. And then again, the solo co-op thing should be a lot of fun. So you'll definitely see me talk about that down the road this fall. So anyway, that is Talisman 5th edition. Thanks.